Jimin endured pain for Jungkook in the rain. Their silent embrace stunned the entire audience cloud-red. A storm-soaked night, a silent sacrifice, and a forbidden embrace. Jimin endures pain for Jungkook as the rain witnesses a love no one expected. The first crack of thunder split the stadium sky at the exact moment Jimin collapsed to his knees, rain exploding against the stage lights as Jungkook screamed his name. The music died mid-beat. Thousands of voices froze. Cameras kept rolling. Jimin's palm was pressed hard against his side, fingers slick with rain and something darker, and yet his eyes were not on the wound or the chaos rushing toward him. They were locked on Jungkook, wide with a calm that felt almost terrifying. Jungkook dropped beside him, hands shaking, breath torn out of his chest as if the storm had invaded his lungs. "Don't," Jimin whispered, barely audible beneath the rain. "Don't look scared." But Jungkook was terrified. Not of the storm, not of the screaming crowd, not even of the blood seeping through Jimin's costume. He was terrified of the way Jimin was smiling at him, soft and apologetic, like someone who had already decided what he was willing to lose. Rain blurred the world into silver streaks as staff rushed the stage, but Jungkook barely felt them pulling him back. He leaned forward instead, forehead touching Jimin's, their microphones forgotten, their breathing the only rhythm left. "I told you I'd take it," Jimin murmured. "I always do." Those words dragged Jungkook backward through memory, through rehearsals that ran past dawn, through whispered arguments in empty hallways, through the secret that had lived between them for years like a live wire under skin. They hadn't planned this night to end in pain. Earlier, the rain had been nothing more than atmosphere, a dramatic blessing soaking the stage as the crowd screamed louder. Jungkook had laughed into his mic, hair plastered to his forehead, adrenaline singing in his blood. Jimin had danced like the storm belonged to him, every movement precise, beautiful, dangerous. Only Jungkook had noticed the shadow near the barricade, the wrongness in the air, the flash of metal too low, too fast. Jungkook had moved without thinking. And Jimin had moved faster. Now, as security finally blocked the cameras and medics lifted Jimin onto a stretcher, Jungkook followed, refusing to let go. His hand stayed tangled in Jimin's sleeve, knuckles white, as if loosening his grip might make this real in a way he couldn't survive. In the ambulance, the world shrank to red lights and the sharp smell of antiseptic. Jimin hissed when they pressed gauze to his side, jaw tightening, but he didn't cry out. He never did. Pain, for Jimin, was something to be managed, endured, transformed into silence. Jungkook sat beside him, knees bouncing, eyes fixed on every rise and fall of Jimin's chest. Guilt gnawed at him, raw and relentless. He had known the risks of loving like this, quietly, invisibly, always second to duty, but he hadn't known how heavy the cost would feel when it finally came due. "Why did you do that?" Jungkook asked, voice cracking despite his effort to keep it steady. "You could have." "Let you get hurt," Jimin interrupted, finally turning his head. His gaze was sharp now, almost fierce beneath the exhaustion. "Never." The ambulance lurched, and Jungkook grabbed the rail, swallowing hard. "You don't get to decide that alone." A faint smile curved Jimin's lips. "I already did, a long time ago." Silence settled between them, thick with everything they never said out loud. Jungkook remembered the nights Jimin stayed behind after practice, redoing steps until his feet bled because perfection felt safer than vulnerability. He remembered the way Jimin always stood half a step closer during interviews, a shield disguised as coincidence. He remembered the habit Jimin had of pressing his thumb into Jungkook's wrist when anxiety spiked, grounding them both. Jimin had always endured, for the group, for the fans, for Jungkook. At the hospital, fluorescent lights replaced the storm. Doctors moved efficiently, voices calm, professional. Jungkook was forced to wait outside the treatment room, hands still damp, heart pounding like it hadn't finished the concert. He paced until the floor felt worn thin beneath his steps, replaying the moment on stage over and over, hatting himself for being 1 second too slow. When the door finally opened, Jungkook looked up like a lifeline had been thrown. Jimin was pale but awake, stitched and bandaged, exhaustion lining his face. When their eyes met, something unspoken eased just a little. Jungkook crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping himself at the last moment, painfully aware of where they were, who might see. Jimin solved it by reaching out first. Their embrace was quiet, careful, but devastating. Jungkook pressed his forehead into Jimin's shoulder, breath shuddering as the reality finally hit him. Jimin's arms came around his back, warm and steady, as if he hadn't just faced something that could have ended everything. "I was so scared," Jungkook whispered. "I know," Jimin said, fingers tightening. "I felt it." Outside, news spread fast. Headlines, slowed down clips, endless speculation. Fans would argue about what they'd seen, about whether the embrace meant more than relief, about whether love could hide in something so brief and wordless. Inside that room, none of it mattered. Jimin closed his eyes, pain pulsing with every heartbeat, and let himself lean into Jungkook's warmth. He had endured the storm, the wound, the fear, because some things were worth every scar. And Jungkook, holding him there, finally understood that love didn't always announce itself with words. Sometimes, it stood in the rain and chose to stay. The rain had stopped, but the tension hadn't. Jungkook sat on the edge of the hospital bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as if it might crack open and swallow the thoughts he couldn't control. The room was quiet except for the steady beep of a monitor and the distant echo of footsteps in the hallway. Jimin lay back against the pillows, eyes half-lidded, painkillers dulling the sharpest edges but not the weight pressing on his chest. "You're thinking too loudly," Jimin said at last. Jungkook looked up, startled. "You always say that." "Because it's always true." Jimin turned his head, studying him. "You're blaming yourself." Jungkook's jaw tightened. "You jumped in front of something meant for me. How am I supposed not to?" Jimin exhaled slowly. "Because it wasn't meant for anyone. It was chaos, and I chose." "That's exactly the problem," Jungkook snapped, the words bursting out before he could stop them. He stood abruptly, packing the narrow room. "You always choose everyone else over yourself, over me." Jimin's eyes darkened. "Don't say that." "Why not?" Jungkook shot back, turning to face him. "It's true. You smile, you endure, you bleed if you have to, and you never ask what it does to the people who love you." The word hung between them, dangerous and electric. Jimin pushed himself upright despite the protest of his body. "Lower your voice." "Why?" Jungkook laughed bitterly. "So they won't hear, so it stays hidden like everything else." Footsteps passed the door. Jungkook forced himself to breathe, then dropped back into the chair, hands shaking. "I watched you fall," he said more quietly. "I thought I was about to lose you. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" Jimin's expression softened, guilt flickering across his features. "I do. That's why I moved." Silence stretched, thick and heavy. Jimin broke it first. "Do you remember the first time you got hurt during training?" Jungkook frowned. "My shoulder, I was 17. "You tried to pretend you were fine," Jimin said. "You smiled through it. I saw the blood on your sleeve before anyone else did." Jungkook swallowed. "You stayed with me all night." "I promised myself then," Jimin continued, voice steady, "that if I ever had to choose between my pain and yours, I'd take mine every time." Jungkook's eyes burned. "You don't get to make vows like that without asking me." "I wasn't strong enough to ask," Jimin admitted. "Loving you was already dangerous. Saying it out loud would have destroyed us." Jungkook stood again, crossing the room in 2 steps. "You think this doesn't destroy us?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "Almost losing you destroys me." Jimin looked up at him, defenses cracking. "Then what do you want me to do?" "Live," Jungkook said fiercely. "For yourself, not as my shield, not as everyone's miracle." For a moment, Jimin said nothing. Then he laughed softly, a sound edged with exhaustion. "You're asking me to unlearn everything I am." "I'm asking you to stay," Jungkook replied. "With me." The door opened without warning. Their manager froze mid-step, eyes darting between them, taking in Jungkook's flushed face, Jimin's tear-bright eyes, the way they stood too close. The air shifted instantly, charged with unspoken implications. He cleared his throat. "The press is going crazy. They want statements. Fans are outside. And His gaze lingered, sharp, calculating. They're already asking questions about what they saw on stage. Jimin leaned back, mask snapping into place. We'll handle it. Jungkook stared at him, disbelief flashing across his face. Handle it how? With silence, Jimin said quietly. Jungkook shook his head. I'm tired of silence. The manager's brow furrowed. Jungkook. No, Jungkook said, voice steady despite the storm inside him. Not this time. Jimin reached out, fingers brushing Jungkook's wrist in a familiar grounding gesture. Please. Jungkook looked down at their joined hands, then back at Jimin. You almost died for me, he said. I won't let that be erased. The room felt suddenly too small. The manager's phone buzzed incessantly. Outside, the world waited, hungry and unforgiving. Jimin closed his eyes, pain throbbing beneath the bandages, fear threading through his chest, not of exposure, not of scandal, but of losing Jungkook to resentment and regret. When he opened them, his voice was barely audible. Then we tell the truth. The manager stiffened. You can't mean. I mean enough, Jimin interrupted, calm but resolute. No more hiding behind half-answers. Jungkook's breath caught. Are you sure? Jimin met his gaze, something fierce and tender burning there. I endured the rain. I can endure the fallout, but I won't endure a life where you're hurting because of me. Jungkook's hand tightened around his. In that moment, fear and relief collided, messy and overwhelming but real. Outside, the cameras waited. Inside, two hearts beat loudly enough to finally be heard. The press room smelled like metal and heat, lights glaring down so hard they felt like interrogation lamps. Jungkook could hear his own pulse louder than the murmurs of reporters gathering, cameras clicking even before anyone spoke. Jimin sat beside him, posture straight despite the stiffness in his body, hands folded neatly in his lap as if this were just another schedule. Only Jungkook could feel the subtle tremor when their knees brushed. A reporter's voice cut through the noise. Jimin, how serious was the injury? Serious enough, Jimin replied calmly, but I'm recovering. Another voice followed immediately, sharper. The footage shows you shielding Jungkook. Was that instinct or something more? The room leaned forward. Jungkook inhaled sharply, fingers curling against his thigh. He felt Jimin's presence like gravity, steady but heavy, and something inside him snapped, not in anger but in exhaustion. It wasn't instinct, Jungkook said before anyone could stop him. The room froze. Jimin turned his head slowly. Jungkook. No, Jungkook continued, voice trembling but unwavering. It was a choice, and I'm tired of pretending it didn't mean anything. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Cameras zoomed closer. The manager stiffened near the wall, face pale. Jimin closed his eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them again. We agreed. We agreed to survive, Jungkook interrupted softly, not to erase ourselves. A reporter laughed nervously. Are you saying there's a personal relationship here? Jungkook stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. I'm saying I watched someone I love bleed in front of thousands of people because he thought my life mattered more than his. The word love detonated in the room. Jimin's breath caught. For the first time since the rain, since the blood, since the hospital, he looked afraid, not of consequences, but of being seen too clearly. Jungkook, he whispered, please. Jungkook turned to him, eyes glassy. Tell me I'm wrong. Look at me and say it didn't mean what it meant. Silence roared. Jimin's voice came out hoarse. I can't. The room erupted. Shouts overlapped, questions fired like bullets. Security moved in closer. The manager's phone rang nonstop. Jimin rose slowly, wincing but standing tall. We're done here, Jimin said firmly. That's all we're saying today. They were ushered out through a side door, chaos exploding behind them. In the hallway, the air felt thin, unreal. Jungkook leaned against the wall, chest heaving, adrenaline crashing hard. I didn't plan that, he said, almost to himself. Jimin stepped closer. I know. Are you angry? Jimin shook his head. I'm terrified. Jungkook let out a broken laugh. Me too. Back at the dorm, the world felt too quiet. Phones buzzed relentlessly on the table, notifications piling up like accusations. Jungkook ignored them all. Jimin sank onto the couch, exhaustion finally winning, shoulders slumping as if he'd been holding himself together with sheer will. I always thought, Jimin said slowly, staring at his hands, that if I endured enough, everything would stay intact. The group, the dream, you. Jungkook sat across from him. You don't have to be indestructible to be worthy. Jimin's lips trembled. I was so afraid that if I let myself want you openly, I'd ruin everything you worked for. Jungkook leaned forward. You didn't ruin anything. You saved me, and now I'm choosing you. Jimin looked up sharply. Even if it costs us. It already cost us, Jungkook replied. The difference is now it's honest. Jimin's eyes filled, tears spilling freely for the first time. He covered his face, shoulders shaking. Jungkook moved without hesitation, pulling him into an embrace that felt different from the hospital one, less fragile, more desperate. I didn't want to be brave, Jimin whispered into his shoulder. I just didn't want to lose you. Jungkook held him tighter. You won't, not alone. Outside, the world argued, speculated, judged. Inside, two people finally let themselves feel the full weight of what they'd been carrying. Fear, love, sacrifice, and the terrifying relief of no longer hiding. Jimin pulled back slightly, forehead resting against Jungkook's. Whatever happens next, he said quietly, promise me one thing. Jungkook nodded. Anything. Don't disappear when it gets ugly. Jungkook smiled through tears. I stayed in the rain. I'm not going anywhere now. And for the first time since the storm, Jimin believed him. Morning arrived like an accusation. Jungkook woke to the vibration of his phone rattling against the nightstand, the screen lighting up again, and again with headlines he didn't need to read to know their weight. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of the city waking up outside the dorm window. From the living room came the soft clink of a mug being set down, the quiet shuffle of movement that told him Jimin was already awake. He found him standing by the window, one arm folded protectively across his ribs, the other holding a phone he wasn't really looking at. The light made him look thinner, more fragile than he ever did on stage. They're tearing us apart, Jungkook said softly. Jimin didn't turn. They always do, it's just louder this time. Jungkook stepped closer. Are you okay? Jimin laughed without humor. Define okay. Jungkook reached out, hesitating only a second before resting his hand on Jimin's back. He felt the tension there, coiled tight. I'm not sorry, Jungkook said. About yesterday, about saying it. I know, Jimin replied. That's what scares me. He finally turned around, eyes tired but sharp. I spent years learning how to survive quietly. You set a match to that in one sentence. Jungkook swallowed. And you jumped in front of a blade for me. We're even. Jimin stepped closer, voice dropping. You don't understand what this means. Sponsors will pull out. Schedules will change. They might separate us. Jungkook's chest tightened. You think I don't know that? Then why did you do it? Jimin asked, suddenly fierce. Why didn't you let me carry it like I always do? Because I love you, Jungkook shot back, and I'm done watching you bleed in silence. The words hung heavy between them. Jimin looked away, jaw clenched, as if bracing for impact. A knock shattered the moment. The manager entered without waiting, face drawn, eyes already sharp with calculation. We need to talk, now. They sat at opposite ends of the couch, Jungkook's knee bouncing uncontrollably, Jimin's hands clasped together to hide the tremor. The manager paced. You've set off a firestorm, he said bluntly. Fans are divided, the company is furious. They want damage control. Jungkook lifted his chin. We didn't lie. That's not the point, the manager snapped. The point is image, contracts, years of planning. Jimin spoke quietly. What are they asking? The manager stopped packing. They want a statement, something vague, emotional brotherhood, stress, misinterpretation. Jungkook laughed bitterly. So we lie. They want you to, the manager said. And they want distance. Separate schedules, less interaction. Jimin's breath hitched before he could stop it. No, Jungkook said immediately. Absolutely not. The manager turned to him. This isn't a choice. Jungkook stood. Then make it one. Silence stretched, thick and dangerous. The manager's gaze flicked to Jimin. And you? Are you really willing to burn everything you've built for this? Jimin rose slowly, pain flashing across his face but resolve hardening his voice. I already almost died for it. The manager stared at him, stunned. Jimin continued. You asked me once what I was afraid of most. It wasn't losing my career. It was losing him and pretending it didn't hurt. Jungkook's eyes burned. The manager exhaled sharply. You're forcing our hand. Jimin nodded. Good. After he left, the room felt hollowed out. Jungkook turned to Jimin, panic finally breaking through his defiance. What if they take everything from us? Jimin stepped closer, lifting Jungkook's chin gently. Then we'll learn how to live without it. Jungkook shook his head. I don't want to be the reason. You're not, Jimin said firmly. You're the reason I'm still standing. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Jungkook leaned in, resting his forehead against Jimin's, their breaths mingling. I'm scared, Jungkook whispered. So am I, Jimin admitted. But for the first time, I'm not alone in it. Outside, the world continued to roar, opinions clashing, narratives forming, love being debated like a crime. Inside the quiet of the dorm, two people stood at the edge of everything they knew, hands intertwined, choosing each other not because it was safe, but because it was true. And whatever came next, they would face it awake. The conference room at the company building was too cold, the air conditioning humming like a warning that never stopped. Jungkook felt it in his bones as he sat beside Jimin at the long, polished table, their reflections distorted on its glossy surface. Across from them, executives whispered among themselves, faces carefully neutral, eyes sharp with judgment. You put us in an impossible position, one of them finally said. Jungkook leaned forward before Jimin could speak. No, we told the truth. You're the ones deciding it's impossible. A murmur rippled across the table. Jimin's hand brushed against Jungkook's knee beneath the table, a silent plea for caution, but Jungkook's pulse was already racing. This isn't about morality, another executive said. It's about consequences. Jimin lifted his head. Consequences for who? For the group, the man replied. For the brand, for the fans who feel betrayed. Jungkook laughed sharply. Betrayed by what? Two people caring about each other. One of the executives leaned back. Careful, this attitude is exactly the problem. Jimin finally spoke, voice calm but cutting. The problem is you built an image so fragile that honesty feels like a threat. Silence slammed into the room. The CEO, who had been quiet until now, folded his hands. You have two options. Release the statement we prepared and continue your careers with minimal disruption, or refuse and face an indefinite hiatus while we reassess. Jungkook's stomach dropped. You mean punish us? We mean protect the company, the CEO replied evenly. Jimin inhaled slowly, pain flaring in his side as tension tightened his body. And if we refuse? The CEO met his gaze. Then you'll stand alone. Jungkook turned to Jimin, panic and fury warring in his chest. Say something, he whispered. Jimin looked at him for a long moment, eyes searching Jungkook's face as if memorizing it. Then he turned back to the table. I spent my life believing endurance was the same as loyalty, Jimin said. I was wrong. Loyalty without humanity is just control. The CEO's jaw tightened. This is your final answer. Jimin nodded. Yes. Jungkook felt something crack open inside him. Terror, pride, love all colliding at once. He reached for Jimin's hand openly this time, no attempt to hide it. Gasps erupted around the table. So be it, the CEO said coldly. Meeting adjourned. They were escorted out without another word. In the elevator, the doors closed with a dull thud that felt like a sentence being passed. Jungkook sagged against the wall, breath coming fast. What did we just do? Jimin pressed the emergency stop. The elevator jolted, lights flickering. Jungkook stared at him. Jimin. I need a minute, Jimin said quietly. The silence inside the stalled elevator was suffocating. Jimin leaned back, sliding down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, face pale, eyes burning. I'm so angry, he admitted. At them, at myself, at how easy it was for them to threaten everything. Jungkook dropped down in front of him. I'd do it again. Jimin laughed shakily. I know, that's why I love you. Jungkook froze. You said it. Jimin looked up, tears streaking freely now. I almost lost you. I'm done rationing the truth. Jungkook pulled him into his arms, holding him tightly despite the pain it caused. Whatever they take from us, they can't take this. Jimin buried his face against Jungkook's shoulder. I'm scared of what comes next. So am I, Jungkook said. But we didn't choose safety, we chose each other. The elevator lights steadied. Somewhere above them, alarms softened, the building adjusting to the interruption. When the elevator finally moved again, neither of them pulled away. Outside the building, reporters swarmed instantly, voices shouting questions that blurred into noise. Jungkook felt Jimin's grip tighten, steadying him. No statements today, Jimin said firmly as they pushed forward. A reporter yelled, Are you afraid this is the end? Jungkook stopped walking. Jimin turned sharply. Jungkook. Jungkook faced the cameras, heart pounding. I'm afraid of living a lie, he said. Nothing else. The crowd erupted. They were rushed into the car, doors slamming shut, the world fatting into streaks of motion outside the windows. Jungkook leaned back, trembling. That was reckless, Jimin said softly. Jungkook smiled weakly. You taught me how. Jimin reached for his hand again, squeezing it. Then let's endure this together. As the car disappeared down the road, neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring, only that the storm they'd stepped into was no longer something they'd face alone. Night fell heavy and restless. The car ride back was silent except for the low hum of the engine and the occasional vibration of Jungkook's phone, which he had flipped face down on his thigh, as if it were something alive that might bite him. Jimin leaned his head against the window, eyes closed, the city lights sliding across his face in broken reflections. The adrenaline had drained from his body, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion that settled into his bones. When they finally reached the door barely closed before Jungkook turned to him. You scared them, Jungkook said, voice low. Jimin opened his eyes. Good. Jungkook laughed under his breath, sharp and breathless. You realize they might freeze everything. Tour, albums, the group. I know, Jimin interrupted, pushing himself upright despite the stab of pain in his side. I've known since the moment you said that word in the press room. Jungkook's jaw tightened. Love. Jimin nodded. There was no going back after that. Jungkook stepped closer, frustration burning hot beneath his fear. Then, why do you look like you're already bracing to disappear? Jimin's eyes flickered. Because I'm used to being the one who steps back. That's exactly what I'm afraid of, Jungkook snapped. That you'll decide it's easier to sacrifice yourself again. Jimin turned fully to him now. Don't confuse sacrifice with abandonment. Jungkook's voice cracked. I watched you almost die. Don't tell me it's different. Silence slammed between them. Jimin's shoulders rose and fell slowly as he struggled to keep his composure. I didn't do that because I wanted to disappear, he said. I did it because I wanted you to live. And what about now? Jungkook demanded. What do you want now? Jimin looked at him for a long time, really looked, as if weighing every possible future in Jungkook's eyes. I want to stop pretending that loving you is something shameful. Jungkook felt his chest tighten painfully. Then don't. A sharp knock on the door made them both flinch. The manager stepped inside again, face tight, eyes already exhausted. You should see this. He held up his tablet. The screen was filled with headlines, reactions scrolling endlessly. Some were supportive, raw, and emotional. Others were vicious, calling them selfish, accusing them of betrayal. One clip replayed Jungkook's words on loop, slowed down, dissected like evidence. They're dividing the fandom, the manager said quietly. The company is panicking. Jungkook scoffed. They panic every time we breathe wrong. This time is different, the manager replied. They're talking about a statement denying everything, or, he hesitated, an apology. Jungkook's eyes darkened. For what? For making people uncomfortable. Jimin stepped forward, voice calm but lethal. I was stabbed protecting him. He confessed loving me, and you want us to apologize for discomfort. The manager held up his hands. I'm not saying I agree. I'm saying this is where we are. Jungkook laughed bitterly. They want us to bleed quietly again. Jimin closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with a clarity that made Jungkook's breath hitch. Tell them no. The manager stared. Jimin. No apologies, Jimin continued. No denial. If they want silence, we'll give them silence, but we won't lie. The manager exhaled sharply. This could cost you everything. Jimin didn't hesitate. Some things are worth more. After he left, the room felt unbearably still. Jungkook stared at Jimin, voice barely above a whisper. Are you sure you won't regret this? Jimin stepped closer until there was no space left between them. I regret every year I spent afraid. Jungkook's breath shook. Then why does it still feel like we're about to fall off a cliff? Jimin lifted his hand, brushing his thumb gently under Jungkook's eye, wiping away moisture Jungkook hadn't realized had fallen. Because courage doesn't mean the fear goes away. It means you jump anyway. Jungkook swallowed hard. With me. Jimin smiled softly, painfully sincere. Always. They stood there, close enough to feel each other's heartbeats, the weight of the world pressing in from every side. Outside, voices rose and fell in the distance, fans gathered at the gates, chanting their names with love and anger tangled together. Jungkook rested his forehead against Jimin's. If this ends everything we knew. We'll build something new, Jimin finished. Jungkook let out a shaky breath, then laughed quietly. You really are terrifying when you're honest. Jimin smiled faintly. You bring it out of me. In that small room, under the glow of a single lamp, they chose again. Not because it was safe, not because it was guaranteed, but because the truth between them was finally louder than the fear. And outside, the storm they had started continued to grow. Dawn came quietly, almost apologetically. Jungkook woke to the sound of breathing beside him, slow and steady. For a moment he didn't remember where they were or why his chest felt so tight. Then he saw Jimin's face in the early light, lines of exhaustion softened by sleep, and everything came rushing back. The rain, the blood, the words spoken too loudly to ever be taken back. Jimin stirred, eyes opening slowly. When he saw Jungkook watching him, he smiled faintly. You didn't sleep. I did, Jungkook lied, just not deeply. Jimin reached out, fingers brushing Jungkook's wrist, grounding him the way he always had. Still here. Jungkook nodded. Still here. The days that followed were not kind. Schedules were canceled. Statements were never released. Silence became their loudest answer. Some fans left, angry and hurt. Others stayed, louder than ever, holding signs outside buildings, sending letters filled with shaking handwriting and unconditional love. The world argued about them like a story that belonged to everyone. But inside the quiet they created for themselves, something fragile and real began to heal. Jimin recovered slowly, each step a reminder of how close he had come to losing everything. Jungkook stayed with him through the pain, through the restless nights, through the moments when doubt crept back in like a familiar ghost. They argued sometimes, sharp, emotional, honest arguments that ended not in silence but in understanding. One evening, weeks later, they stood backstage at a small, unannounced performance. No cameras, no press, just music, dim lights, and a room filled with people who had chosen to stay. Rain began to fall again, light this time, tapping gently against the roof. Jungkook glanced at Jimin. Funny how it always rains. Jimin smiled. Maybe it's not an accident. When they stepped onto the stage, the applause wasn't deafening, it was reverent. The kind that listens. They sang without armor. Every note carried what they had endured, what they had chosen. Near the end, the music softened, and without thinking, Jungkook reached for Jimin's hand. The audience went still, breath held. Jimin squeezed back. No hiding, no explanation. Just truth. They stood there together, rain audible above them, hands joined, hearts exposed. And in that silent embrace, the room understood, not scandal, not controversy, but love forged through pain and courage. Later, when the lights dimmed and the crowd drifted away, Jungkook leaned into Jimin's shoulder. "We survived," he whispered. Jimin closed his eyes, a peaceful smile settling on his lips. "No," he said softly. "We lived." Outside, the rain finally stopped.